Welcome back. Chapter 16, our last chapter in the book. We're going to get to a word called mortgaged. And a lot of people know that a lot of people mortgage their house. Is what they do is they put their house up for collateral, which means that they get a loan and then they pay it back, and then they get to keep the house. If you don't pay the loan, then the bank gets the house. Okay, so you're going to hear about this in just a second. Okay. Chapter 16. Father rented 40 acres of land. He mortgaged one pair of our oxen for seed and grain and sold Bright for $30 to buy some of the supplies we needed. On the land was a one-room log cabin with a stone fireplace for cooking and the storeroom at the north end. We set up our tent nearby and went to work fixing it up. The first thing Father did was to make rockers for the padded box that first Cynthia, then Elijah had slept in during our journey. Now you have a real cradle, I told him, as Mother placed Elijah in it for the first time. He lay there looking up at us, kicking and cooing and smiling. He was such a happy baby. It seemed to me that his bright, dark eyes were staring straight into mine. He knows me, I thought, and I wondered if, young as he was, Elijah remembered that I was the one who had carried him over those last rough, steep parts of the trail. I reached out my hand and gently rocked the cradle until his eyes fluttered closed. Next, Father built a table, some rough stools to sit on, and bedsteads for all of us. The bedsteads were made from young trees trimmed down into poles and fastened to the walls. On shelves underneath the frames, he piled fragrant fir branches. On top of those went the feathered ticks we had carried all the way across the plains, and on top of the ticks our goose down pillows and bright colored quilts. It felt good to finally sleep in a real bed again. In the meantime, Mother and I were busy preparing goods boxes to use as cupboards and dressers. One morning, I took every one of our cooking utensils and the big brass kettle down to a nearby spring. There, with ashes and sand and soap, I did my best to scour away all the signs of our long journey. The next day, we unpacked everything from the wagon and set it in place. On crude shelves built into the wall went the two remaining blue and white cups from Mother's china that Mother had refused to part with on the trail. The small, cracked-looking glass that Father used for shaving, our few books, Father's Bible, and a faded tin-type picture of Grandma with all of her living children. There, said Mother, looking pleased with her efforts. Now we are at home. Seeing the picture reminded me that our folks back in Arkansas did not know we had arrived safely in Oregon. May I write a letter to Grandma? I asked. Of course, said Mother. She wrote a letter home and let me put mine in with it. Dear Grandma, it is with pleasure that I take up my pen to write a few lines. We are all well at present. I have seen many curiosities since I last saw you. Parts of the journey I liked very much, but some parts were tiresome. There was a great deal of sickness, and parts of the road were almost impossible to travel. I am sorry to tell you that Daisy was drowned in the Kaw River, and Lily died from eating a poison weed. We arrived on the 16th of October, making our journey 6 months long. I like Oregon very well, what I have seen of it, but it does not yet seem like home. I cannot be running over to Grandma's house like I used to. We have neighbors, but no meeting house and no schoolhouse. Father will teach us in this winter. There is talk of building a schoolhouse in the spring. You should see Elijah. He is a good baby and hardly cries, except when he's hungry. Lavina and I have the thimbles you gave us, and we are sewing our quilts. I now have 14 squares. We have your likeness, and it does us your likeness. That tin type is like a picture. And it does us all a great deal of good to look at it. I have written everything I can think of, so I had better close. Give my love to Uncle Jimmy and Cousin Will and Great Aunt Harriet and all the rest, and write soon. Yours affectionately, Mary Ellen Todd. As soon as I finished writing, I realized that I had said nothing about Grandma coming to be with us in Oregon, and I knew the reason that I hadn't. The chances were that Grandma would not be able to make that long, hard journey. Once she could have. I could imagine her as a young woman standing over those plains and rivers and mountains as easily as if she were stepping on clouds. But she was old now and not so strong. Probably, I thought, we would never see Grandma again. I felt a pang of loneliness then, so sharp that it was like a deep down ache in my insides, an ache that might never go away. My eyes were stinging with tears as I folded the letter to give to Mother. As soon as the cabin was roughly furnished, Father and John put in a crop. To tide us over until harvesting time, Father got some extra work splitting rails for fences, and John went to work in our neighboring farm, coming home only on Sundays. But even this might not be enough to get us through the winter, Father said. Sorry about that. So Mother brought a spinning wheel. She and Lavina and I spun wool into yarn and then knitted the yarn into socks, which Mother found she could sell at a good price. Every evening, sitting around the stone fireplace, Lavina and I knit one each. Father was not used to splitting rails, and one day he injured both of his hands. Bruises turned into abscesses. That's like you get an infection in it. And for several weeks, he could not do any work. While we were sorry to see him suffer, I enjoyed having him home, having the chance to wait on him. Lavina and I fed him, tied his shoes, combed his hair for him, and turned the pages of his book. I don't know what I'd do without you children, he said, smiling. Why do you have to split rails? I asked him. Couldn't you make pottery instead like you used to? Father shook his head regretfully. I have no kiln, he reminded me, and even if I did, very few of the people settling hereabouts could afford to buy my wares. No, we have come to a place where the land is rich. We must put all of our strength into farming now. Father had been able to buy a side of beef and a few vegetables, so we would not go hungry that winter. Still, I kept longing for more vegetables. John was always teasing about my mountain fever appetite. One day, while poking through some dense, high weeds, I discovered a little patch of forgotten potatoes in our neighbor's land. Can I dig them up? I asked Father. You will have to ask Mr. McCorkle, he replied. Perhaps he will let you do it on shares. It's when you share. She would dig up all the potatoes, and the guy would probably take half, and she'd get the other half if she dug all these potatoes up. That's called shares, like share farming, sharecropping. So I mustered up my courage and went to talk to him. Mr. McCorkle looked at me, shrewd blue eyes peering out of the round, white, whiskered face. On shares, you say, he repeated, frowning doubtfully. Half for your family and half for me? I nodded. Suddenly he thrust out his hand. All right, young lady, he agreed. You have a deal. Lavina and I went to work. It was difficult hunting for the dried up vines along all those tall weeds, and then digging the small potatoes out of the ground. Winter was fast approaching, and the cold made our fingers sting. Sometimes Lavina cried. Her hands ached so much. We took to making fires, working a little, then stopping to warm ourselves around the small blaze. We kept at it day after day until at last we had 6 sacks of potatoes for ourselves and 6 for Mr. McCorkle. When I brought them to show Mother, her face broke into one of her rare smiles. I am proud of you, Mary Ellen, she told me. You stuck to the task until it was done. It must have been that mountain appetite that made you dig so hard, Father added, laughing. You too shall have new books for this. And come spring, new dresses, promised Mother. I felt warm inside, almost as if I were standing close by the fire. Mother did care for me. I could feel it, even if she was never going to show it with hugs and kisses the way Grandma did. Then suddenly I realized something else. It had been weeks now since I had thought about my real mother. That picture of her that I had carried around so long in my head seemed to have slipped away, and somehow, without my even noticing it, Mother had taken her place. It kind of reminds me of the K, when Timothy wasn't such a bad guy after all, was it? I like how these people changed throughout the book. Time passed, and now it was truly winter. We rejoiced that we had our snug little cabin, enough food to eat, good warm fires, and books to read. Polly and Blackie and the other remaining cattle rested and fed in rich pastures, and Rover was his old self again, happily chasing squirrels. Sometimes on warm days, Lavina and I still played in our covered wagon, which now stood empty near the cabin. One day, sitting up on the spring seat, I picked up Father's whip again, and once more I couldn't do it. Still, it seemed to me that it didn't feel quite so heavy. Every day after that, while Lavina played her pretend games with her dolls inside the wagon, I practiced lifting that big whip, holding it over my heads of the imaginary team of oxen, and flicking my wrist hard. Finally, one day, I heard a faint "whoop." You did it! Exclaimed Lavina, poking her brown head out of the wagon. You made it crack. Yes, I said happily. A few days later, I was approaching the cabin door, carrying the water bucket. I overheard Father and Mother talking. Did you know, said Father, that Mary Ellen is beginning to be able to crack the whip? Pride welled up inside me and brimmed over in a smile. But then I heard Mother's reply. I'm afraid it's not a very ladylike thing to do, she said. There it was again, that constant concern about being a lady. Mother would always be pushing it at me, it seemed, and I would always be resisting. But in spite of her words, I walked around for the next few days filled with a secret joy. I had the power to set things going. It was December now, and the days were drawing near to Christmas. To get ready for our first celebration in our new home, Mother cleaned the cabin from top to bottom. Lavina and I went out into the woods and gathered ferns and vines and evergreen branches. Arranging them in bunches, we decorated the walls and shelves and table. Then we helped Mother make 6 real candles. She had borrowed the candle molds from Mrs. Dougherty, another of our neighbors. In the center of each mold, we carefully placed a cotton wick. After that, we poured in hot tallow and let it cool. When the tallow was set, we warmed the molds just a little, and out came 6 nice, straight, white candles. On Christmas morning, I was the first to wake up. For a moment, I just lay there beneath the 2 warm quilts, breathing in the sweet, piney smell of evergreens. Then, opening my eyes, I looked around at the looping chains of evergreens hanging from the shelves, and the pickle jar filled with ferns on the table, and next to it the beautiful brass candlestick with its tall white candle waiting to be lighted. I nudged Lavina, sleeping next to me. Christmas gift, I whispered in her ear. It was a game we played in our family every Christmas morning. The one who said this greeting first scored a point. In a moment, Lavina was jumping out of bed and whispered in Cynthia's ear, Christmas gift. And soon everyone was up, greeting each other and laughing. Christmas gift, Christmas gift. We did not expect any real gifts this year, but Mother surprised Lavina and me with mittens that she had knitted for us late in the evenings after we were asleep. And Father had carved a doll with a wooden head, and Mother had dressed it in scraps of red and white fabric for Cynthia. So now she had a doll just like ours. And for baby Elijah, there was a string of buttons to play with. I yike her, Cynthia kept squealing with excitement, her pudgy fingers holding her new doll tight. At noon, we sat down to our Christmas dinner. The table was covered with tasty dishes. Roast beef and gravy, mashed potatoes, cabbage slaw, cornbread baked in our Dutch oven, and the sweet butter to go with it. Mother had also made some pumpkin butter, which added a spicy flavor. With all this and Mother's sweet cake and some stick candy that John had brought us, we were as full as we could be. After dinner, we sang hymns and carols for a while. Then Father brought out his chessboard, and he and John settled in for a game, while Mother and I tried to teach Lavina to play checkers. Later, the 3 of us children went outside and played hide and seek and Annie over, and Kitty wants a corner. We played until Cynthia stubbed her toe and started to cry, and then we all went back inside. Finally, the evening chores were done. The cows had been milked and all the animals fed. It was time to light our Christmas candles. One by one, Father put a match to them, and the cabin was filled with a warm, flickering glow. Oh, breathed Cynthia, in her eyes wide. We gathered around the stone fireplace, Father and Mother in the 2 split-bottomed easy chairs, the rest of us on the floor. Father cracked hazelnuts while Mother set some corn to popping in the Dutch oven, looking into the flames, seeing the old familiar chairs drawn up by the fire, smelling the warm smell of popcorn. I thought our cabin was beginning to feel like home. Remember the time we tried to pop corn out in the rain near the Kaw River? John asked, grinning. It was all hard and tasted like smoke, I recall, but we thought it was good. Then I remembered something else. And how about our 2-year-old yearling that was drowned in the crossing? John's face flushed pink, but then he retorted by singing, Enter into my jaw and sit down on my throat. And I had to laugh. Okay, end of first part.